Hello, this is Dr. Darnise, and welcome back to another episode of Dr. Darnise's House of Religion, Magic, and Conjure. Hope everyone is well. Obviously, times are challenging, so I do hope everybody is well, and thank you for taking the time to spend with me on my channel, watching these videos. Hopefully, it is edifying to you on some level. So thank you for helping me grow the channel. Thanks for joining me on Patreon. Those of you who will become members, thank you. And as well, I have put a link down below for those of you who might want to just make a donation without joining a membership. That's fine as well. But anyway, let's just get right into it. In terms of today's video, this is about Black nationalism and what came to my mind considering what's been going on in our country over the last, I don't know, 2 weeks maybe. I mean, things move so quickly now. But I'm referring to the shooting deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor as just two of the most recent Black people who've been shot rather arbitrarily, right? And, periodically we go through this because it just seems like there will just be open season on shooting and killing Black people. And, so here we go again. And so what occurred to me was that I could really foresee a resurgence in Black nationalism, both as a sort of political, social movement and the religious movements, meaning, the Nation of Islam. I mean, I'm really looking for Louis Farrakhan's voice right now. Where is Brother Minister Louis Farrakhan? And I really, I have to do some more. I should have looked up thefinalcall.com, right? Because I'm sure that Brother Minister Louis Farrakhan is speaking about these things. Um, but what I'm anticipating is that there should be a, an increase in people, young Black men in particular, who decide to join the Nation of Islam. It seems that this is the perfect storm for a rise in Black nationalism, right? Like when there's this kind of overt violence against Black people, this is when we see the rise in people joining Black nationalist organizations. So the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam. I'm just kind of wondering, like, at what point are we going to see this? And so I've been thinking about this, and then I saw, you know, that Michigan protest that was happening, the people who, well, really, the white Trump supporters who decide that they're over COVID-19 and they want to demand that the Michigan lawmakers open the state, the Michigan governor in particular. And so they have stormed the state house there with their weapons, right? Like they're fully armed white people who could storm the state house and threaten the governor and other lawmakers and still be called protesters and not be called criminals and not be called terrorists, right? And so we have seen the response of the Michigan lawmakers is to stop their sessions because they're afraid of the threat. So one of the Black politicians there was escorted recently. Y'all must have seen this in the news, right? She was escorted by Black armed citizens who said, well, we are going to protect our sister here, Black people with guns. We are going to walk her into the state house because we've got armed so-called protesters who are white, who feel completely, no compunction about showing up armed for their protest, right? So I was like, yeah, see, that's what I'm expecting, is that we're going to see more Black armed people take to the streets. And in this case, it was to protect a sister who was a politician trying to go to work in the state house. So they, with their weapons, surrounded her and escorted her. Now, I didn't hear any pushback from law enforcement to say that they can't do it. The black people can't do it because they've had these white people doing it for however long their protesting has been going on, right? And it's just been like, oh yeah, let them, they have a right. Okay, so in addition, Breonna Taylor is the young black woman who was shot in her home in Louisville, Kentucky. She was in her own home, and the police raided an apparently alleged unlawful raid, or they had the wrong place, or whatever the deal is, but they came in and they shot her to death. And so and obviously Ahmaud Arbery, right? He's jogging through a neighborhood in Georgia, and white people came upon him and demanded that he account for himself, that he identify himself, because they were suspicious and this black man is required to answer their questions, right? Like, how outrageous is that, that a black person can be stopped on the street by any random white person, and he or she has to say, well, here's my ID and here's why I'm here. That's what we call white privilege. That's what we call a sense of entitlement. Okay, so where I'm going with this is, what does black resistance look like to this kind of overt, violent terrorism and racism? So historically, we've been here before, and that's where we have seen the rise of Black nationalism. So when I'm teaching this in class, I lay out, like, here's, for example, Marcus Garvey, right? Most of us know about Marcus Garvey's Back to Africa movement, but what he was saying is, America is not a place for black people. What is our form of resistance? Our form of resistance is to leave here, just to segregate. We don't want to assimilate. We're going to segregate and leave here. And then, of course, there were black people, most black people said, no, we're not leaving. We've got blood in the soil here. We fought for this country. We're going to stay. Okay, so then you get the rise of Black nationalist religions, something like the Moorish Science Temple under Noble Drew Ali. And then you get the Nation of Islam under Fard Muhammad, and then Elijah Muhammad, and obviously Malcolm X, and now Louis Farrakhan. But that arose as a I guess I'll use the word militant resistance to white supremacy, a strong resistance to violent terrorism from white supremacists. And so here we are again. And so the historian in me says, we've been here before. And what I'm expecting to see, because history repeats itself, is that we will have more people, black people, saying, well, we have to arm ourselves. We have to protect ourselves from the police, which is what the Black Panther said to us, right? The Black Panther said, we have to have our own armed patrol against the police because we have to defend ourselves against the police. And something like the Nation of Islam, which has a security force called the Fruit of Islam, which says we are willing to defend ourselves by any means necessary, the same way that any white person would defend themselves. If attacked, then we have to defend ourselves and attack back. So what I'm seeing is like, oh, okay, we're getting ready to have that. I really think that we're already having a civil war. Some people say, on social media, oh, we're headed for a civil war. I think we're already having it. It just looks like this now. It's not like, oh, we're going to be, separate armies and we're going to fight each other like on a so-called battlefield. I think America is a battlefield right now. And so what I see then is, we just came out of a situation where we had a black leader, Barack Obama, and then we went through, or are going through, Reconstruction 2.0, maybe 3.0 really, which is the time, Reconstruction was the time when we saw a backlash against those early black politicians who were in the state houses of America right after the Civil War. There were a number of black politicians who were in the state house in Washington. And there was so much resentment that there could be black people in political power that this is the time when the Klan arose in the 1870s. And they call themselves the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan because they really saw themselves as defenders of America and the American way of life. And their role was to protect white womanhood and to um, contain the black threat. That's how they envision themselves. Contain the black threat, to immobilize in particular black men, right? So we've seen this before. Here we are in 2020, and so much of our society is just like, oh wow, we're back there. So I'm really expecting to see a rise in black nationalism. People are going to, black people are going to take to the streets. Black people are already saying we have to arm ourselves. So I'm looking for Black Panthers, I guess 3.0, the rise in the Nation of Islam. And also I've noticed that, and maybe you have too, that there's been a renewed interest in Malcolm X. Not that it has ever really died away, but I've been seeing that people are talking about Malcolm X again. And more recently, just the other day on May 15th, there was a conversation between Bernice King and Ilyasa Shabazz, one of Malcolm's daughters. And in that conversation, she was talking about, like people are listening to Malcolm again. We're listening to his voice again because here we are again. So here's his daughter saying, you know what, this was my father's message in the 60s, and black people are plugging into it again. Um, and the point of that dialogue was to say that, Martin and Malcolm were really not as opposed to each other as people thought. Obviously, they obviously had differences, but not entirely. So I've seen that, and also a colleague of mine has written a new book called The Sword and the Shield, and it's written. His name is Peniel Joseph. I'll put it in the comment section there, or in the description box rather. But his name is Peniel Joseph, and he's written a book called The Sword and the Shield, and it's like a dual. He describes it as a dual biography about Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and he really, it's a scholarly piece, so he's really looking at them as individuals and at their positions, and once again saying it's not that they were that much opposed. um there was a certain level in which they were, but when you got down to it, not so much. So you could, I mean, that book is available um on Amazon now, or wherever on books or Malik Books. um So I encourage you to, wherever you are, if you can support Black businesses, bookstores. Um, in Philadelphia, I know there's Uncle Bobby's, and or of course you can order it. You don't have to live there. And so there's a book coming out by another colleague of mine, Eddie Glaude, who's a Princeton professor, and he's written a book about James Baldwin, and it's called "Begin Again: James Baldwin's America and the Message for Us Today," because what Baldwin was saying to us in the '60s, here we are again. So it's called "Begin Again: James Baldwin's America and its urgent lessons for our own." And that'll be out on August the 4th. So again, wherever you get books, these are some things that, I mean, I'm going to definitely be reading these things, and I'm bringing them into my classroom when we start in the fall, whatever that looks like. But, here we are for such a time as this, where we have to once again hold America's feet to the fire in terms of this being a democracy, in terms of this being, a place of equality. It's Black people move that forward. We've seen it as Black people who make America live up to her promises. And so, yeah, I'm going to be looking for those books. The Baldwin book, again, not until August the 4th, but it's already in my Amazon shopping cart. I'm going to buy it somewhere else, though. And yeah, so I just want to come on here, and I'm curious to hear what you have to to say, or read what you have to say in the comments about what you see in terms of Black nationalism rising up again. I mean, do you think it's time? Do you think that we have to? Do you think it's outmoded? Do you disagree with me and say, I think Black nationalism has already seen its day and we have to do something else? Because maybe that's the deal also. Whatever you think, I'd like to read your comments. Thank you again. I'm going to wrap it up here. And please continue to support, like, share, subscribe, and join me on Patreon. But that's all for now. So take care.